has not existed that long, has only existed since 1922, so not quite a century. You'd have to look at Wales, Scotland, and England comprises 50% of the UK's land mass in England. With their official residence, St James's Palace is in England, in London to be more exact. So anyway, but we've only got 2 views at the moment. I don't know, King Irish, but I mean, obviously distant related to the Latin like word Rex, although we have to speak a Celtic language. We draw upon Romance languages a little bit. And the kingship in Ireland was elective, and often when a king, say a second degree male relative of the new king, could be king and indeed vote in the election, the royal family decide amongst themselves who would be the monarch. So it could be the dead king's brother, uncle, father even, cousin, nephew, maybe grandson, great-grandson, could be second cousin, but there's a limit to how far out it could be in son-in-law, grandson, things like that. But obviously this is going over hundreds of years, and not that many records, so we can't be absolutely authoritative about it, just in case there was the occasional exception. Okay, so what else about monarchy there? Obviously only Northern Ireland is part of the UK, which is only about a fifth of the Irish territory. But that's a monarchy which somewhat contributed to the UK monarchy. I mean, the Prince of Wales is certainly descended from Brian Boru. In Scotland, Wales, something similar eventually became primogenitor. And by the way, when Henry II became the overlord of Ireland, well, 1171, he landed in Ireland, the Synod of Cashel, where our episcopate recognised him as the rightful Lord of Ireland, and the Treaty of Windsor in 1175, and the High King of Ireland acknowledged that he was the liege man of Henry II. Didn't mean the end of the High Kings of Ireland, who continued for over a century afterwards. Anyways, there's something similar. Obviously, the Scots were an Irish tribe for the northern part of Ireland, invaded that, and then there were the Picts and the Scots, but eventually the Scots defeated the Picts. But nobody in eastern Scotland says, oh, I'm a Pict, not a Scot. They simply accept that. And as with so many peoples defined from the outside, the Latin word Picti, painted ones, and their language has been completely lost to history. But nobody thinks that, oh, well, that's really bad. We can't have Scots Gaelic spoken because it comes from Ireland originally. But oddly, some people in Scotland have a hostile attitude towards England, but not against this more recent, much more distant invasion. So there's a monarch in Scotland as well, of course, and Wales had its princes, and the whole of Wales wasn't united. Often Northern Wales and Southern Wales, separate ones. Why does everyone say North and South Wales, not Northern and Southern? There we are. But the British Isles, we drew on some traditions of monarchy from other parts of the world as 2,000 years. I don't know, in Ireland we had the Ogham script, which I think is the oldest form of writing in the British Isles. And it is a bit readable, as it's sort of related to runes, but there are not that many Ogham inscriptions. We don't have a great deal of documentary evidence about monarchy going back too far. Obviously, the Julius Caesar coming to Britannia wrote about it in his Gallic Wars, as in Wars of Gaul. It was a sort of sideshow to 2 summers in a row invading the southeastern corner of Great Britain. But I know there's some writing. Hello there, Agnieszka Danchik. Dzień dobry, proszę. I can't say too much more. Where else was I? So obviously, the ancient Greek historians Strabo and Ptolemy, they'd mentioned Ireland and Great Britain, but really no particulars. I don't think either of them claimed to have been anywhere near the British Isles. Having trouble with the live stream, mine stalls and is blurry. Well, mine was cutting out a bit ago, so the internet is dodgy. Anyway, there are these mythic histories of kings of Britain who supposedly existed a long time ago. And yes, kings of Britain, certainly the whole of the island of Great Britain, probably not Ireland too. One of them is Lear, King Lear, you know, that Shakespeare play, and historians now accept that he's mythical. And there are other ones in certain chronicles that are probably semi-mythical. There might have been a real historical figure there, but greatly embellished, and a lot of just fantasies added onto that person's story. And we often have single sources completely uncorroborated by archaeological evidence or anything else. and King Lud. Indeed, there's Ludgate Hill in London beside St Paul's Cathedral. There's no gate there anymore. One of the old gates in the city of London. That's what the street's called, Bishopsgate, Newgate, and so forth. But he's long since gone. So in Irish legend, there's Lear, Lir, the children of Lear, as in who turned into swans and lived for centuries. I think related to the same mythical figure, or Caradoc, or King Arthur. But he may well have been a Roman centurion, Artorius, left behind in the 5th century AD to resist the Jutes, Angles, and Saxons coming over from what's now the Netherlands, Germany, and Denmark. But he gallantly fought the losing battle and retreating to Camelot. Where is that? Somewhere in southwest England. There are a number of sites which thought to be possibly where he was holding out with his knights of the Round Table, who dance whenever they're able. They do routines and lots of scenes and imitate Clark Gable. Well, that's a homage, as the Americans say, homage to Monty Python, who was it Terry Jones who just passed away. That genius of them. Sorry, I got a slightly sniffly snout. And there was the Lady of the Lake with the sword held up to her because metal was so rare and so precious. Apparently, they threw it into. But anyway, archaeologists have found hundreds of swords in lakes. So that was that. Anyway, and the Anglo-Saxon word for king is related to König in German, but implies a military leader. But like I said, say the Roman word for emperor, imperator, is like commander, imperare, to command, or if something is imperative, it's giving an order like that. So informal leadership emerges, and then people know that there's heredity, and if someone has some leadership traits, that will be passed on to their children, so they think. But okay, it could be, but the man has 2 sons, one of them could get the leadership qualities and the other not, or indeed it could skip a generation, go straight to the grandson. There's no guarantee that even if the father has these leadership abilities, that either or any of his sons, or indeed his daughters, are going to get them. And they can get bad genes from whoever it is. And obviously, what shapes the character? Well, character formation is experiential as well as genetic. So there was that, and also there's a desire to keep things in the family, as in the property ownership. Going back to the Dark Ages, obviously most people had herds of cattle, a little bit of arable farming. So people, as they're practicing the culture of the soil, they wish to own fertile land to pass it on to their progeny. And so these positions became heritable. As I say, one strictly primogenitor. In case you don't know what that is, I'll just spell that out. That means father to son, favoring the elder over the younger, because there might be several sons, the eldest. And what's the other thing is boys over girls, definitely. No female could rule. And the other thing is legitimate over illegitimate, because a monarch may well have children outside wedlock, and so they had no right of inheritance. So a king, even in some systems like Christianity in the Dark Ages tolerated polygamy, particularly among those of high socioeconomic status, so that be one wife would be an official wife, there'd be junior wives, and so only the senior wife's son could inherit. The other thing is, so you're a king, so a king of a neighboring realm would say, you can marry my daughter to cement the alliance. This king of the neighboring realm wants that his grandson is going to inherit, and not the other king's son by a junior wife, a concubine, something like that. So here's the first king of England, reputed to be Egbert. If memory serves, in 802 AD. But he was really ruling Wessex, which is southwest England. So when the Saxons came to the British Isles, some of them settled, well, in the area that's now called Essex, the East Saxons, the Middlesex Saxons, Middlesex, really the London area, the South Saxons, the Sussex, which is the southern coast, of England, or directly south of London, and the West Saxons, several counties in southwest England. But what else about Saxons and all that? So bringing them with them their Germanic traditions, but the Salic law didn't come over, which was very relevant in continental Europe, to say that no female could inherit, nor indeed could the right of inheritance pass through a female, which was vital in the 100 Years' War, arguing whether this had applicability or not, and whether the King of England was also the rightful King of France. So there's the concept of blue blood, so royals trying to be as royal as possible, a prince ideally marrying a princess, and below that is nobility. So growing in egalitarianism as societies become larger, groups become larger and more complex, with more property ownership. So there's a very small group tend to share things on a fairly equal basis, but the larger, more impersonal it is, the more distance between the ruler and the ruled, there comes to a situation where there's a greater inegalitarianism, and so kings are exalted, and people ascribe to them these semi-divine properties. As I talk about Kenneth MacAlpin being king of Scotland, uniting Scotland by force, of course, and these realms were created by force, and some sort of a feudal system growing up with the king at the top of the pyramid, and a few landholders below him, thanes or whatever you want to call it. In Ireland, a high king, and that wasn't for a single dynasty. There will be regular fisticuffs, a power struggle once in a while to boot out one dynasty and replace it with another. And obviously some provincial kings and some really petty kings below that. But is king even an apposite translation in Ireland? Because maybe some sort of baron or something would be a better one. Hello from British Columbia, home of Meghan and Harry. Are they there? The rumour is they're going to Toronto. Certainly Prince Harry has left the United Kingdom. Do you believe he should have security paid for by the Canadian taxpayer? I don't. Do you believe that Prince Harry ought to be stripped of the title Duke? He's still a prince, or that one Prince too, as he's going to do few, if any, royal duties. He had it all and he threw it away. Can there be a halfway house? I'm not sure. Anyway, some people saw this coming, so I'd be interested to hear your take on it. I'm worried this sounds the death knell of the monarchy in Canada. So most countries had some sort of system of heritable government, and these weren't just showpieces, not a figurehead as it is today, but wielding actual political authority and having decision-making roles. So the process of government were rather simple, ruling by fiat back then, not quite so consultative. Let me see, so sometimes be hailed as being a king, as having these leadership abilities that way. So just by brain and brawn ruling and being able to bend others to their will. I suppose that's what kingship was about. And then indeed this sort of carapace of nonsense and religiosity began to surround it to try and protect it from some rational scrutiny. And as you could be plunged into a bloodbath at regular intervals, as we were in Ireland, as people battling it out for the leadership. As I say, kingship was elected, which was good because you think the person who come out on top would have certain leadership abilities, or a ruthlessness, unscrupulousness as well. But we obviously weakened ourselves with this internecine warfare. Yes, they should pay for security. We'll make it back and increase tourism. Well, only if they display themselves through increased tourism, or open their house to the public, or make public appearances. The whole thing is they say they want more privacy. But the trouble is, I think, they don't want the press saying boo to them, and they don't want to do any tedious royal duties. What they want is to rake in the cash, and Meghan to have this megaphone for her political prejudices. Anyway, so just think of the film roles she can get, the tell-all interviews, woe is me. And all be on her terms, and you can only interview if you ask the 9 questions which we vetted. So the Bible obviously has kings, and Christianity came to the British Isles under the Romans, but the British weren't like a fully Christian till about the 8th century AD. Virtually everybody was a Christian by then. Although then the Danes and the Norsemen started invading, and they were pagans, believing in Wotan, Thor, and so on. Hello there, Robert. So remember when the people of ancient Israel said we want a king, the others seem to have kings, we ought to have a king as well. And obviously we'd had the Roman emperor in Britannia, obviously not in Ireland, traded with the Romans. So that was a sort of external monarchy. So you've got to remember, till the late 19th century, monarchy was near universal. Are they all related? I don't know about all, but yeah, certainly most of them, because as I was saying, if you're going to marry someone of similar status as a prince or princess, you have to marry someone from the royal house, and they're not that many. And before you know it, you're related to pretty much all of them, even if it's several generations ago. So really trying to marry within royalty and be just a race apart. Remember, looking at England, even in the middle 11th century, the population is only about 1.5 million, and people could rise quite fast because I suppose there's quite a lot of land, but you need a huge amount of land to produce sufficient food, because it wouldn't plough if you're lucky. Even horses are much smaller. Sheep and pigs hadn't been selectively bred. We had the agricultural revolution. There were hobbits, those sheep, much farmers hotel. Don't they care about their subjects, or do they? Your opinion? Yeah, good question. Well, they seem to care deeply, which is why they're so wounded that people are no longer enamored of them. But as I say, as the Bible had the king as the Lord's anointed, Zadok the prophet, and who is it? Zadok the priest and Nathan the prophet anointed Solomon the king, as it says it in that thing by Georg Friedrich Handel. Zadok the priest is called the tune. Indeed, it was played at the coronation of Her Britannic Majesty. So there is a biblical basis for kingship. The trouble is, in the good book, there's some chapters which suggest that kingship is highly desirable and most laudable, has divine sanction, and others where kings meet with the disapprobation of the Almighty. The video signal is quite poor. I know it's been problematic all day. Well, shiver me timbers. But then the Pope was the ultimate authority for Christianity in Western Europe. As in Christendom, he was supposed to call the shots, and only a good Christian, a good Catholic in Western Europe could be a monarch. And kings sometimes fell with popes, often investiture contest, arguing over who had the right to nominate bishops, or should there be a short list with bishops and archbishops, and monarchs would be crowned by archbishops. And the church owned lots of land. People donated land to churches, so abbeys and priories and so forth for monks and nuns, owning huge amounts of farmland. The clergy and the religious doing some of the farm work or renting some of it out. And increasingly, the senior clergy, the bishops, the archbishops, the abbots, the abbesses, drawn from economic clout because farmland was the main resource. Well into the Middle Ages, 9 out of 10 people were farmers. What year did Henry break with Rome? 1532 to 34. Well, it's debatable. It's a process, not a one-off event. Arguably as early as 1529, saying no more appeals to Rome, even about ecclesiastical cases. Stop paying Peter's pence. These are the dues to Rome. And on an I put it's 1533, but it's questionable. That's when in that January, an Archbishop Thomas Cranmer of Canterbury secretly marry him to Anne Boleyn, whilst he was sort of officially married to the other one, to Catherine of Aragon, and blah blah blah. So kings taking oath, taking to obey the laws. I shall focus principally on England, as I say, because that's where the British monarchy is most associated with, just for reasons of geography and population. So they keep the laws, but that means that begs the question: is kingship contractual or not? Are there any conditions they have to fulfill, or do we require unconditional loyalty? And the idea that they're somewhat hemmed in, they cannot simply rule by decree. That Charles I was later arguing. So could they be deposed? Begs the question. They sometimes were within their family. Then intermarrying with the Danes, not always fighting, because the Danish presence, certainly in England, whereas in Ireland is even longer, is from roughly 870 to well after the 10th century AD. Yeah, about 250 years. Like Harold Godwinson, last Anglo-Saxon king of England, he was half Danish. You say that as really Catholic being another word for prince. I always wonder, had granted Henry VIII divorce, what would happen to Protestantism? Yeah, exactly. It's a critical turning point. I remember, is it Brandon Bean quoting this, say, "Speak not of the alien minister, for his words have no meaning or faith, for the foundation stone of his temple are the bollocks of Henry VIII." Had one of Catherine Aragon's infant sons lived, there would have been no break with Rome. Had she died of no break with Rome, had Henry VIII died earlier, there would have been no break with Rome. Or had the Pope granted an annulment, there would have been no break. There's unacceptable as a nullity because of non-consummation or all sorts of other reasons. It's not to do with misbehaviour. As to say that he wasn't married to her in the first place. Why didn't Irish Catholics just lie and actually conform? And the fascinating thing, being both Catholic and faith, that was it. Became from London, the feebler governmental control was often indirect control. This is the feudal system. And the feudal system was around, well, from the earliest days, but quite formalised by the time the Normans come along. And in Ireland, of course, we had some sort of a feudal system. I suppose having a high king and regional kings and petty kings, that is a feudal system, really. And having slavery. But we didn't have serfdom as such. So in that case, we were one of the freest countries. Even the Normans didn't bring in serfdom. Why did it not happen? So the crown can project power to enforce their will. Aristocrats, what are you going to do? Have to send an army, invest their castle. And if you don't do that, you lose authority. But if you do that, it's costly. You might lose, provoke a bigger rebellion. Was the Ultraplantation a mistake by James I, the English elite? To mention, wrote various books on this, ousted and indeed assassinated, and that's morally justified. So that obviously horrified his pupil, James VI, King of Scots, who became an ardent believer in divine right of kings, because in the 16th century, Protestant countries too, to say that the monarch has untrammeled. Anglo-Saxon kings had taken oaths to obey the laws, and the Normans came along and doing likewise. And that was that. Then Magna Carta came along with under King John. Bad King John, as he's known, and it also, one of the clauses said, and people are entitled to rebel if he breaks this. No plantation, no partition, and no United Irishmen. So, well, yeah, it was certainly very consequential. So we can play these sort of counterfactual historical games. I know they're gripping. Sort of a judge as well, and appointing judges. He can't be everywhere. Calling a legislature. There's little, if any, elected based on this, because merchants can't be that rich. It's just united, and Great Britain united, and the two islands united together. And France, the Netherlands, Germany, something like that. I might accept it, but just the King's writing department as chancery is to do with that. The font even, or the chancellor himself can't do it, but he has to have a department of dozens of clerks left and to manage all that paperwork. And so then he gradually became the King's chief minister, a bit like prime minister, but eventually more head of the legal system. And Lord Chancellor still exists, but it's more like Minister for Justice now, not actually as a judge. And until only about 15 years ago, he was a judge as well. Committee and Chancellor. The British monarchy, not even the British ethically, just would tell all loyalists and Anglophiles that Norman and Germans mostly. I don't understand the questions, are grammatical. So the every learned man was a clergyman, because the church ran all education, ran all the schools and the few universities there were. So often you were ordained if you were going to be in any way academic, and a doctor, clergyman, and the king would confess to him. So he's the king's conscience, and that's why equity came around in law, as in trying to persuade the king to be more merciful. So there's law and equity bizarrely coexisting. In judicial cases, because they will not suffer a wrong without a remedy. Okay, there's another curious royal tradition about the virginity of brides. Well, I don't think it actually said it had to be, but really not anyone wasn't her blood relative, or apart from her husband. Why? Because if she was touching with that guy, she's not pregnant by the king. It's her paramour has impregnated her, and no DNA test, no way to disprove it. And so they didn't used to dance with anyone outside their family. Queen Victoria, her physician never ever examined her. She had to describe her symptoms, and if a physical examination was absolutely essential, get one of his female nurses to perform the physical examination, and then she would report back what she saw. It would have been the most intolerable intrusion upon her regal dignity for a male to do so. British monarchy but British. Well, they are British, whatever that is. But yeah, they've got German, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, Russian, Greek, Danish, and I don't know whatever else stock. Her Britannic Majesty certainly has got black ancestry in the Middle Ages, Danish, Norwegian, and on and on. Like Prince Philip is said to consider his nationality European. And so like they but then this current queen, she was a modernizer in her time. She advanced things and started dancing with men when she was married, dancing with Kwame Nkrumah, the first president of Ghana in 1957 at the Ghanaian independence celebrations. I think then they would have him lynched in the United States if he'd done that. And obviously I'm absolutely fine with that. I think it's fantastic that black people and white people can love each other and dance together. So other royal traditions is purple robes. That goes back to the ancient Romans. Elizabeth II related to Brian Boru. Yeah, she definitely is. But loads of people are, because do that thing, that exponential increase, to double it, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, roughly 4 generations per century. 1,000 years ago, therefore about 40 generations. You tell me how many descendants you'd have. Rare and hard to find. Well, so it took hundreds of Caesars to make the purple robe. So kings wearing purple robes. Now, Edward the Confessor, his chair is still there in Westminster Abbey for the coronation, and there were some slippers that he wore, and so and traditional and a fervent believer in the divine right of kings, he insisted on actually putting his feet inside King Edward's fit, who the cap fit. And the Stone of Destiny, don't ask me why, and the stone there supposedly came from the Holy Land. And if you read about Jacob's ladder in the book of Genesis, he uses a stone as a pillow, and then he dreams about Jacob's ladder, of the angels ascending and descending the ladder. But that stone somehow made it to, but it was crowned through king, was William Scots. He took it to Westminster Abbey, where it remained for centuries. And when Robert the Bruce was crowned, some people said that in 1950, some Scottish nationalist undergraduates broke into Westminster Abbey on Christmas Eve and stole it. You can see the film about it, and hid it in various places, broke it up, but eventually returned it. Not quite sure if it's the correct Stone of Destiny, or indeed when it was taken, is it the true Stone of Destiny, because the people at Scone Abbey were told several weeks in advance that Edward I's men were going to come and confiscate it, so they might have sold them a pup and given them the wrong stone, because how could you tell one from the other, especially if you shaped it like the special one. So that's that. But anyway, under John Major, the Stone of Destiny was returned to Edinburgh and is now in Edinburgh Castle as a sop to Scots nationalist opinion. So this idea that monarchs have blue blood are somehow a breed apart, are special, obviously furphy, they're not really especially talented, or being super snobby, trying to have armorial rank back and back and back, as in have a coat of arms, as have armorial rank for so many generations. But you have commoners marrying in, it's quite an ordinary thing now. William the Third was William Orange was illegitimate. Yeah, I'm minded to agree. Actually, I think James II was good news. He did bring in with Louis XIV of France to bring back Catholicism, the state religion, as soon as the security of his crown of his throne allowed. Well, that was never going to happen. So I'm not sure if he was ever serious about doing so. So there we are. Okay, that's about enough. I could go about monarchy all the time. I'm not going to tell about every single monarch. You've got to have more sort of specific questions. So please subscribe. I really need to subscribe. Thank you so much for doing so. The Ulster Scots betrayed the Jacobite king. Yeah, I suppose so. It was related to Robert the Bruce and after William Wallace Bruce sacrifice. Well, the odd thing is the idea of Scotland being a separate realm had gone by there. Please, London,